Okay, now it is.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay, start that again. So the editorial boards at PLOS tend to be larger than subject-specific or society journals, and that's to cover the broad scopes and high volumes of submissions. Section editors advise on subject-specific issues and manuscripts and participate on a deeper level in section engagement. And academic editors, you oversee the peer review process and are responsible to a very large degree in determining what we publish or don't. Let me show you the editorial board website. So this is where you can find your fellow editors and your record for yourself. So you can search in this bar here by name, country, region, section, classification. So I've searched here for precision agriculture just to show you a few editors. So we can see that there's 14 here on PLOS One. Each journal will have their own version of this, of the larger journals, and then you can scroll through. So this will just let you kind of see who's there, and that's a place that you can point to as well should you need to demonstrate to anyone that you're on one of our boards. So the academic editor role, as I've said, includes basically all of the manuscript handling. You'll be conducting an initial assessment based on PLOS publication criteria. You'll be responsible for finding and inviting the reviewers, evaluating their feedback, making your editorial decision, and then communicating that decision to the author. Academic editors also play an active role in the community, and they're really engaged representatives of PLOS. So we very much want you going out and spreading our mission as a not-for-profit who's fully invested in open access and open science in all of its forms. We also take publication and research ethics very seriously here at PLOS, and we expect editorial board members to do the same. You can find the code of conduct on the PLOS Editor Centre, and you should have seen this before during your onboarding as well. And that's linked here, and it would have been shared to you as part of recruitment. It's just this website, so you'll always have access to it. So if you come across any behaviour that you're concerned about, you can check back in here to see if this is within what PLOS allows or something that we should be concerned about, and you can reach out to us to get any assistance or guidance as necessary. So we use Editorial Manager as our submission system that's provided by a company called Aries. When you're starting out as a newbie, so you might have done this already, but you're going to need to update your information, indicate your area's expertise, and set unavailable dates. We have a guide which you can access, and we'll share all of the links with you at the end so you can get to these when you actually need them. I promise we don't want you to memorize all of this at all. We just want you to see where everything is so that when you come to actually need it, you can kind of picture it in your head and think of where to go. So this guide is available on the Editor Centre. It's your guide to Editorial Manager. When you come to log in, you're going to need to put your username, password, and click this editor login. And then another one, the top right is going to show you some roles. And you're going to want to make sure you've got that set as academic editor as well. So if the page looks a bit unusual and it's not what you're expecting to see, it might have toggled you back into author mode. So look at that drop down, and the roles that you have available to you will be shown there, and you can click academic editor. This one is really important to indicate your areas of expertise. So if you go into EM and you log in, you can click, as it shows here, you'll have an update my information button, and then you can add your personal classification. So use these classifications first. We'd like you to add at least 5 if you can, and that's because our matching system is algorithm based and it's going to rely on these. So the better and more accurate you can get your classifications. More isn't always better, but accurate is always better. So get as many as you can that are still things that you would be comfortable handling. And then if there's anything that is one of your areas that isn't included in our classifications, you can add those as keywords. If you have any trouble setting these up, let us know and we can help you do it. So as you add them, you're just going to tick the boxes. As you find them, you can search in the bar, click add, and then you're going to save these to your account. I also want to show you a slightly little found feature, and that's the unavailable dates. So we would like for you to use these unavailable dates if you have anything like a sabbatical coming up, kind of holidays where you're going to have prolonged periods where you can't respond or take on new manuscripts. We would hope that when you're accepting to handle manuscripts that you have some understanding of your commitment going forward so that you can handle those through to the next decision, just because otherwise this can be really tricky to get reassigned, and we try and avoid delays that this would cause to the process where the author's waiting. So as I said, this is available and you can look all the way through this later. I just wanted to call out those couple of features to you that are really important. I can see lots of chat messages coming in, but I won't look at them too much until the end. Jamie, if there's anyone's got technical issues, shout at me. Okay, so this is the life of manuscript at PLOS. These are the stages that it goes through until it gets to a final decision. So they're going to submit, and actually before you even see a manuscript as an academic editor, PLOS have done some checks to begin with. We're trying to save you as much time as possible and make sure that anything that needs fixing gets fixed. So at initial technical check, we look for things like formatting, image visibility, metadata, any ethics concerns, anything that would mean it either has to go back to the author straight away for fixing or providing if they've missed files, or anything that's a major ethical concern and shouldn't even be going to reviewers. So at that initial technical check, and then during subscan, that's what we do. So at subscan, this is editor checks, and they're looking for things like scope, publication criteria, ethics, and they might even desk reject here. So if we find something that hasn't been carried out to our standards, especially in terms of ethics, or is well beyond our scope, we'll just reject it here. So if you see it, it's got to the academic editor assignment stage and you'll receive an invite. Once you've reviewed the manuscript, you have the option at that point to issue your own desk reject. So if something is clearly not going to meet our criteria, you can reject it at that point. If it's going to continue, what you do next is to invite reviewers. And then you're going to review those, make your decision, write your comments, and submit your decision in the letter to the authors. They then receive a pre-revision technical check from the staff, and the decision's sent as you wrote it, just after we've done some additional checks. And then that decision could have been rejected, it could be revised, in which case they're going to resubmit. And go back through the process again, or that decision could actually be accept. If you're issuing an accept decision, just keep in mind that the authors won't be able to make changes at that point. It's not the same as a revision. If it goes through accept, it goes very quickly to our final tech check, production and publication. So if there are outstanding reviewer comments, it's not suitable to issue an accept. You're going to have to put a minor revision and get those fixed first. Okay. So when you receive your invitation to handle manuscripts, these are going to come through email. Let me show you the email. So there's another guide, obviously, so you can check this out later. So this is what the email is going to look like. And we've just called out here in this guide different parts that you'll be able to check in on. So you should have everything that you need to be deciding whether it's suitable to accept this manuscript. You're going to have the subject line that's going to clearly say it's from PLOS and it's an invitation. You'll have the author list, manuscript name, etc. If you can't clearly see whether you should be handling this, whether it's within your area, you can actually use this feature, which is to log into new invitations folder. And this is going to allow you to check out the full manuscript. You could download the PDF from there. So if you're not quite sure, best to have a double check. But if you can tell whether you can straight off accept or decline it, these are the links that you use here. And then just to briefly go over, this is when responding to manuscript invitations. This is our ideal timeline. Obviously, sometimes these aren't met, but this is what we like to do. So within a few days of accepting, you're having your initial evaluation, you're starting to invite and secure your reviewers, and that might take 1 to 2 weeks to find and get some people signed up. And then they've got 2 to 3 weeks to complete their review. and then a few days more to review those comments and make your decision, reacquaint yourself with the manuscript. So that's our ideal timeline there that we would like everyone to try and stick to when possible. When you're accepting or declining the invitation, these are the areas that we want you to think about. So do you have time to handle it through to final decision? If at that point you've got a little bit of time, but you know something's coming up fairly soon, it would actually be better for the manuscript if you didn't accept that one. And then obviously that you set your unavailable dates. Check if it's in your area of expertise, that you don't have competing interests. And then another reason to accept that might be overlooked is that it's actually not suitable for peer review. If you've looked at it and it doesn't look promising and you don't think you'd want to send it to peer review, you can still accept that as long as it's within your area of expertise and you can issue the reject decision. Sometimes manuscripts sit somewhat because we struggle to find academic editors and everyone's looking and thinking that paper's not really there in terms of what PLOS's requirements are and our guidelines. And then nobody picks it up and then it sits. So it's always best to send early feedback and a quick decision when it's a clear-cut case that you think it shouldn't go to peer review. So that's a reason to accept, not to decline the invitation. But as I said, this is all available and you can look through this more later. Lots of frequently asked questions here as well that might come up for you. Here's the timeline that I just mentioned. Dates all the same. So yeah, just keep these in mind. Okay, Jamie, I need to give you the reins. Give us a second while we do a quick changeover.
Thanks, Louise. Yep. Let me just share my screen and hopefully you can now see some slides again, the same slide, in fact. Right, okay, yeah, so it's over to me now just to talk you through a few aspects of the peer review process and your role as an editor, adjudicating reviewer comments and issuing decisions. So the first thing that we'll touch on is the initial evaluation that you perform when a manuscript arrives with you when you've accepted an assignment. So the first thing to bear in mind is that your whole assessment of a manuscript that's been assigned to you as the handling editor should be based on the journal's publication criteria. And regardless of which journal you're assigned to, and I didn't keep up to date with exactly where everyone's from, I think you're almost all from PLOS One, if not entirely. But the commonalities between many of our journals and all of those that could be represented on this call is that the publication criteria really focus on questions of reproducibility and methodological rigor. So what we certainly shouldn't be doing is issuing rejections based on novelty or how novel we perceive the work as being. So please don't go down that route when you're looking at a manuscript. We've specifically designed these journals to be inclusive and to have that very clear focus on reproducibility and sound science is the phrase that's sometimes used. Other publication criteria look at things like the quality of the written English language in the manuscript. We do need to make sure that the language is intelligible, that it's clear and exact. And that's important for the reviewers and for readers to carry out a clear assessment or comprehension of exactly what the nature of the research is and how it's being conducted. So it does tie in with reproducibility in that sense. And you can find more information about all of the publication criteria, the scope of the journals, etc., through the links that we're providing, and of course also on the journal websites. And I think one other thing to bear in mind is that during that subscan process that Louise mentioned, the initial checks that are performed in-house before the paper lands on your desk, it may be that our internal staff editors want to call out specific things to your attention that could relate to something that they're not sure about, that they'd like you to look at more deeply in terms of the methods that have been used, for example, or some aspect of the statistical analyses. And so they may have appended some notes to the paper before sending it across to you for your assessment. And you should be able to find those notes, if there are any, in the confirmation email that you receive when you accept the assignment or on the details page of the manuscript in Editorial Manager. And if there's any need for further interaction with a staff editor to discuss that in detail, they should proactively reach out to you to have that conversation once they can see that you've accepted the assignment. So there may be a little bit of back and forth just to help kind of clarify the situation with the journal office. But typically they're just things that they want to raise to your attention for you to consider as you carry out your assessment. And the other main tool in your arsenal, of course, is your own expertise. So the reason that you've been invited to join the editorial board is that you're an expert in your field, and we want to recognize and make use of your expertise. And importantly, because the scope of the journal, PLOS One in particular, is extremely broad, the publication criteria have to be equivalently broad, if you like. So as you read through them, you'll see that they really just talk about reproducibility, about methodological rigor, about the quality of the language, etc. And there will be more specific requirements for submissions in different fields. And here we're really looking for your judgment and your understanding of what the community standards are in your particular field. So, for example, there might be particular expectations in your own research community around reporting standards and exactly what details of the methodology need to be included in the manuscript in order for it to be considered fully reproducible. So we do rely on your judgment there as to what the appropriate standards are in your particular area and the area that the manuscript falls under. And when you've concluded this initial evaluation, you'll need to decide whether or not you're going to send the manuscript out for external peer review. And the important thing to remember is that if you don't think that the manuscript does or can meet the publication criteria, then you should feel empowered to issue a rejection at that point without sending it out for peer review. So you are fully empowered to make that call. And there is no expectation that just because a paper has been assigned to you, it must be sent out for review. Please do keep that in mind. And I know there was already a question in the chat about that, so hopefully we've headed that off. And of course, there are resources available to help you conducting that initial evaluation. So here is the document that we have available for you, which covers some of the points that I've already discussed. And there's some extra information in there that you might want to peruse. Okay, so the next and probably one of the biggest topics that we have to discuss with editors on a regular basis is finding reviewers. And I will start off by just recognizing that this is one of the major challenges that the editors do face, but I think we've done hopefully a pretty good job of providing you with lots of support as you go about this. But the first question is, who should you be approaching to review a manuscript? And what we'd say is that a suitable reviewer for a manuscript is one who has the right expertise in either the subject matter or the methods that have been used. And I think what's something to bear in mind is that as we increasingly see more interdisciplinary submissions coming into our journals, and some of our journals have a specific focus on interdisciplinary research, it's important to have the right balance of reviewers. So we need to make sure that all aspects of the subject matter, the study system, or population, depending on the context, that they can be expertly investigated by a reviewer, but also any specific methods or statistical analyses, that we also have the right reviewers to assess that side of things as well. So it can be a question of finding complementary reviewers who can look at different aspects of a manuscript rather than necessarily expecting to be able to find the perfect reviewer, if you like, who can cover all angles of any given submission. So that's something to bear in mind. Another really important consideration is the need to avoid reviewers who might have either a real or a perceived conflict of interest. We do have policies around this, of course, in common with all journals out there. And again, we do rely on you to use your judgment to make these calls, particularly where there could be a perceived conflict of interest. And this is really about when somebody comes to read that manuscript and bearing in mind that there is the option for for authors to choose to have their peer review history published alongside the paper. And so in that sense, there can be the possibility of the reviewer's identities being revealed in that way. We need to make sure that there's no potential for any readers to identify potential concerns around conflicts of interest. So if you have questions about COIs, then that's definitely something we can pick up in the chat between us later on. So finding reviewers, as I've said, can be a challenge, and we've seen definitely a bit of a shift in the kind of post-COVID world in terms of response rates from potential reviewers. But we do want to make sure that all of our editorial board members feel supported in finding reviewers and know that there are resources available from PLOS that can help you to stand the best chance of getting reviewers as quickly as possible. So a few things to bear in mind are in particular trying to kind of widen the participation in peer review. I think this is something that I'm particularly interested in, especially because as we've seen from the poll that we had earlier, PLOS One and all of the PLOS journals are very global in the composition of the editorial board, and we'd like to see that also reflected in our reviewer pool. So do try to bring in reviewers who might not necessarily receive invitations on a regular basis. So people who are based outside of some of the overrepresented regions in the publishing landscape, so maybe outside of Europe and North America in particular. Consider also finding reviewers from different career stages. We know that earlier career researchers tend to be less well represented in peer review. Obviously, we need to make sure that we are approaching people who have sufficient experience and expertise, but that doesn't necessarily preclude somebody who's at an earlier career stage, of course. So that's an important thing to bear in mind. And I think that helps to kind of spread the burden, if you like, of participation in peer review across a broader constituency and should help to achieve a higher positive response rate from the invitations that you're sending out. And you can find more kind of tips and tricks on maximizing your efficiency in securing reviewers and the resources that we have available. And all of the reviewer invitations that you're sending out should be going through Editorial Manager. And again, there's information in the Editorial Manager guide as to exactly how to do that. And I think one important thing also to bear in mind is that when you are sending out invitations, it's good to send them out in batches. So rather than just sending them out in sort of dribs and drabs, one at a time, and waiting for a response from that one person who you've invited, I'd suggest sending out probably, let's say, 3 to 4 in a batch, maybe even 5, depending on how things are going in your particular field, but probably no more than that. So we shouldn't be sending out 20 invitations at a time or something, because as you can imagine, that sort of runs the risk of too many reviewers agreeing, and that will overload the author with requests for revisions from that set of reviewers. So there is a balance to be struck there, but we tend to find that 3 to 4 at a time is a good number, and you can adjust that based on your experience over time as well. So as I've said, there are lots of resources available to help with this. So there is this guide for finding and securing reviewers that's got some additional tips on top of what I've already mentioned. There is also a guide to inviting reviewers that helps you to navigate the process in Editorial Manager, and it's got some handy screenshots to show you all the boxes that you need to tick there. Okay, and once you have successfully received your reviewer's comments and made your own evaluation of the manuscript, the next thing that you'll need to do at some point is to issue a decision. So the reviews that you've received from the external reviewers will come through, as is often the case with other journals, in a structured form. What you may find is that there are discrepancies between the feedback that you've received from different reviewers. So, for example, one reviewer may be very positive and encouraging you to accept the manuscript for publication, maybe with some minor revisions. And you might have another reviewer who is not so positive and has some more major criticisms, or is even recommending rejection. So in that split review scenario, you'll need to exercise your judgment as to whether it's possible to tread a middle line between the feedback that the reviewers have provided. Sometimes it could be that one of the reviewers has provided a particularly compelling case for their point of view, and you may side with them based on your own understanding of the subject matter and the criticisms that the reviewers have raised. But when you are carrying out that process of adjudication between the reviewers and exercising your own editorial judgment, please do keep in mind that you should not be stepping in to make any changes to the reviewers' comments, even if you disagree with what one of the reviewers have said. We need to leave their comments intact. That's a core part of the integrity of the peer review process. So don't try to go in and kind of edit or delete any comments that the reviewers have made. But you can call out which comments from the reviewers the authors actually need to respond to. So there may be things that requests that reviewers have made that you feel are actually not necessary for the manuscript to meet the journal's publication criteria, and you can signal in your decision letter to the authors that there are reviewer comments that you think they can actually ignore. That's absolutely fine. The key thing, of course, is that we are focusing on the publication criteria and trying to be constructive and to help the authors, if possible, to bring the manuscript in line with those criteria so that it's acceptable for publication. And so anything that's extraneous to that in the feedback that the reviewers have provided, you can make it clear to the authors that they can put that to one side and just focus on what's really relevant. It may be that in that split review situation or other circumstances, you decide, actually, I need more input at this stage. So one option would be to invite an additional reviewer, and that can help to kind of just clarify whether you should be kind of leaning in one direction or another, if there's consistency in feedback from that third reviewer or however many it might be. Another option is to contact the journal office to talk to a staff editor who might be able to just talk things through with you and help to decide what the best course of action might be. And they could also put you in touch with another member of the editorial board in case that's useful as well. So whether that's another academic editor or one of the journal section editors, so that you can have that conversation and reach a kind of joint conclusion as to the best way forwards. As ever, and as with sending out invitations to reviewers, we also need to be aware of potential publication ethics issues. So when you're reading through reviewers' comments, please be on the lookout for things like citation manipulation. So it could be that reviewers are making excessive recommendations that the authors cite the reviewer's own work. If you do come across situations like that you think need to be looked into or discussed, then please contact the journal office and we can talk to you about that and follow up as needed. And when it comes to then issuing your decision, there is again lots of information in the guides available to help you structure a strong decision letter. But really the key things to bear in mind are being clear, being specific, and being supportive. So I've already mentioned that this is designed to be a constructive process. We're trying to support the authors, but we also need to make sure that we are communicating as clearly as possible exactly what we're expecting from them. And so being very specific about, as I've said, about which reviewer comments you would like to see the authors respond to, and if possible, explaining how the authors can best respond to those, particularly if you think that there's some ambiguity in the reviewer's feedback. Please try to kind of add detail to that or add supportive information to the authors that will put them in the strongest position to be able to make a constructive response to the reviewers and a strong revision that will hopefully bring the manuscript in line with the criteria and ready for publication. And once you've kind of drafted a decision letter, I think it's always good practice to kind of step back and read back through it and think about whether if you were in the author's shoes, would you be able to read that letter and have a clear picture of exactly what you needed to do in order to carry out a successful revision that's likely to lead to a positive outcome. And just to make you aware that one thing that can sometimes happen is that a staff editor from the journal may take a look at your decision letter before it gets sent out to the authors. This is a kind of routine process that we have that we refer to as decision scanning. And essentially what that's aimed at doing is just making sure that there's consistency across the editorial board. We've heard earlier about how we have a pretty large editorial board, particularly on PLOS One, and we obviously want to make sure that everyone is applying our publication criteria in more or less the same way across all of the submissions coming into the journal. So there are particular scenarios, particular types of submissions that we like to check in on just to make sure that that all of those criteria are being applied evenly. And if we have any queries about a decision that you've or a decision letter that you've drafted, we might get in touch with you just to ask for some clarification or to make some suggestions about additional context that might be added to a decision letter before the authors are notified. So there is that kind of pause between you submitting your decision in Editorial Manager and it going out to the authors, just to allow us for that possibility for an interaction with you if we feel that's needed. That does by no means happen in all cases, but we kind of reserve that opportunity for input if that's something that we think is useful. Okay, so as I said, there's lots of resources available. There's one here on issuing decisions. One thing that's particularly useful is this table, which kind of goes through the different potential outcomes in terms of major versus minor revisions. Very happy to talk through the differences between those when we have a chat later on, and the situations in which it might be more reasonable to issue a rejection as opposed to a major revision. So do have a look through that table. I think that's a particularly useful resource that we have there. And on a question of conflicts of interest and other potential publication ethics issues like the citation stacking that we mentioned, there's again a really detailed guide here with some kind of commonly asked questions that you might want to take a look through just to help you kind of guide your approach to different situations. But as I've mentioned, the key thing to bear in mind is, particularly with these publication ethics scenarios, the important thing to do is always to loop in the journal office so that we can weigh in and make sure that any appropriate action is taken in those situations. Okay, I think it's time for me to stop sharing and hand back to Louise.
Okay, let me pick you all back up and I'll find your... Here we are. So that concludes the presentation part of our meeting today. We've got some questions in the chat and Jamie can have a brief look at those now. So when you need to contact us, these are some of the contacts and the resources that you might need. So the resources for Editor's webpage is this one here. So this is for PLOS 1. There's one for each of the journals. They're mostly the same. So you can just go to here, and then all of the guides that we've been directing you to are here. Most of them as quick guides. And then the top one is the Editorial Manager guide. So that's how you literally get things done. So this one-page resources for editors is where you need to go for all of your assistance and guidance. And then if you need to contact us, so anything that's specific to kind of one manuscript, something that's come up, an individual instance, these should go to the journal. So the PLOS one, PLOS.org, the other journals if you're on another journal. And then things that are more experience related. So for instance, if you're receiving a huge invitation volume, we sometimes have our algorithms can get very pinpointed on people and they can send you a lot of invitations. If that does happen to you, let us know straight away, because there are things that we can do to dampen that down a little bit. But we've heard of it sending 5 invitations a day before. So if the algorithm is working, it's just a robot, so it's not perfect. But if it's doing that, let us know straight away and we'll try and get that resolved for you. So these are all of your resources. And let's have a look at the Q&A. So we received some questions through before the meeting started, and they were in relation to inviting editors. So let me find the page. I had it ready. Here we are. So if we're inviting reviewers, this EM guide, the Editorial Manager Guide, this is the one to find for how to do things. A few of you have asked in the chat as well, and it's about inviting people who aren't already in the system. So if you're doing that, you're just going to search for them as usual. An email address is most likely to find you the exact person you want. Obviously, we are global and there are lots of people with the same name. So if you use the email address and then go down to this and click register them. So this will give you the further details on how to register them once you found them, and you can set them up an account. So if you find someone outside of EM, you have their email address you've pulled from somewhere, this is how you're going to invite them. This guide is really thorough and it will take you step by step through everything in EM wise in terms of inviting. So when you come to do that, if you're registering new people, if you're having trouble, this is where you want to look. Obviously, there's lots of pages here. Jamie, that was actually the main one that we received before this started. The only other one was, in case of no timely response from the reviewers, what are other available options that the AE can utilise? So this is where you've got reviewers that aren't sending you things back.
Yeah, so what happens when a reviewer has agreed to take on a review assignment is that they're given a specific window to do that, and the default is 10 days. And there has been a question about that in the chat, so I'll come back to that in a moment. But when the reviewer is approaching the end of that period, they will receive a reminder that's just automatically generated by Editorial Manager. And if then they go beyond the deadline and they still haven't submitted their report, they'll continue to receive a couple of reminders after that stage. Eventually, the system will time out and they will be automatically uninvited as a reviewer, or their assignment will be cancelled. And at that stage, the manuscript kind of returns to the point that it was before the invitation was sent to that reviewer. So really, as the academic editor, I would say if it gets to the point where a reviewer who has agreed to take on that review assignment kind of goes missing, and they don't complete the assignment on time, there's nothing that we would expect you directly to do in relation to that reviewer, because we do have this system in place of the reminders being sent to them and then being chased after the deadline even. So we don't expect you to kind of personally follow up with that reviewer. I mean, I guess a slight caveat to that is if you do have any kind of personal relationship to that reviewer and you do really want their comments on the manuscript, then of course you can feel free to send them an offline or out of the system message to kind of chase them up if you think that would be helpful. But that's not part of the kind of standard workflow that we have. So if they are not able to provide comments for whatever reason, then I'm afraid it does kind of go back to having to look for somebody else. And it may be that taking a look at some of the other tips and tricks that we have to help identify alternative reviewers could become particularly helpful at that stage. But on that question that I mentioned came up in the chat around the time that we allow for reviewers to complete their assignments, we do have it set to a default of 10 days. And I think although there is the option to modify that in Editorial Manager in exceptional circumstances, we would ask you to leave that setting at 10 days. And the reason for that is that we have essentially arrived at that 10-day window as a result of a certain amount of experimentation over the years. And we found that 10-day window really works in terms of maximizing the efficiency of the process. There will always be reviewers who do want or ask for additional time, and generally speaking, if a reviewer requests more than 10 days to complete their assignment, if they send us an email saying, can I have another 5 days or another week, we will almost always grant that request. We'll say that's fine, and we'll make the needed changes in Editorial Manager so that they only receive reminders when it gets to the additional time that we've given them. But if we were to set it to a default of 3 weeks or something, then I think we'd probably still see people asking for more time beyond that. So the 10-day window is there for a reason. It helps us to keep the overall review process working as quickly and efficiently as possible. It's enables us to get decisions to authors as quickly as possible, which of course we know is one of the reasons why authors are attracted to one journal over another. We don't want it to lead to any compromises of the integrity of the peer review process, which is why we do allow extra time when it's asked for. So that's something to keep in mind. And I would say again that, you know, we are aware of the fact that particularly for these very multidisciplinary journals, there may be different expectations about what's a reasonable time frame for peer review in different research communities. I mean, the standards window for biologists, which is my background, versus an economist, are very, very different. And we're always trying to kind of seek a happy medium on these multidisciplinary journals. But as I've said, the 10-day default is the one that we found works best. So please try and stick to that if at all possible. But as I said, there is leeway if it's needed.
Great. Okay, I think we can move. So we've got some questions in the chat that we haven't yet covered. So someone's asking how they can find reviewers that they previously registered when they found them and they were looking to retrieve them. I don't think we have a function in EM to do that, do we? It would have to be.
Yeah, I believe once somebody's been registered in the system through whichever route, so if they've been self-registered or if they've been registered by proxy by an editor, they all go into the same bucket basically. So everyone is added to the same database. So there's no specific function for sifting out people who've been added manually by an editor or have self-registered. So you'll have to find them in the same ways you would for any other reviewer. There are different search fields that you can use when you're trying to find somebody in the database. So if you know the person's email address, for example, I tend to find that that's a particularly easy way of getting to the person that you want. So do use that email field in the search form to find somebody. Otherwise, you can use their first name and last name, and there are other fields like institution, etc., that you can add in that might help to get to the right person.
And we have another, how often can I invite a reviewer?
Mm. So I guess the question here is about if you know that somebody is a reliable reviewer who writes a good review, and you want to invite them for multiple papers that you're handling. Um, that's fine, of course, and we're always pleased to know that there are good reviewers out there who are willing to kind of contribute to the life of the journal. I guess the only thing to bear in mind is just not overburdening any one person. We don't want them to kind of feel burnt out and to end up declining reviews because they feel that they don't have the bandwidth. So that's the only kind of thing to bear in mind, I think. And I guess the other consideration is just making sure that we have broad participation in peer review overall. So we don't want it always to be the same voices who are contributing to the review of submissions to our journals. It's always good, healthy to have input from a wide range uh, of different researchers. So keep that in mind too. But obviously, some fields are bigger than others, and it may be necessary to return to the same people if you're working in a particularly small community, a small area of research.
And we have a specific one about English translation for ethical approvals. Do you know our
Mm.
policy on this?
Yeah, so if we're asking for translations, it doesn't necessarily need to be in exactly the same format as the original document. The key thing is that because we work in the English language on the editorial teams of the journals, we need to have access to all of the relevant information that's in that documentation. So provided that translation has all of the information that's in the original document, it doesn't necessarily need to follow exactly the same structural format as the original documentation, or to be kind of have the original signature of the signatories in the first language. It just needs to have the key information there. So yeah, that's not a problem.
Easy one here is about two reviews. So yes, two reviews is what we're looking for to make a decision. That's a good number to try and get to. When you have more complicated papers that are covering multiple disciplines, you might need more, but ideally you're looking for two.
I
We've
can
got a long one, Jamie.
Yeah, I've just read the first part of the long one. I think there are two questions there. The first one is essentially around um, whether after a first round of review and a first revision, it's reasonable to invite a new reviewer. So the particular scenario that's been described here is we had two external reviewers in the first round. A revision decision has been issued, and we've received the revised manuscript from the author. Too many R's in this world of peer review. And if one of the original reviewers is not available to review the revised manuscript, is it okay to invite a new reviewer to look at the revised manuscript? I think our general feeling and guidance on this would be if it's at all possible not to involve a new reviewer at that stage, then it's from the author's point of view in particular, I think best not to do so, because the likelihood is, and I'm sure you've all had experience of this probably as authors, is that new reviewer will find new things that they would like the authors to do, and that may kind of go beyond the scope of what's already been discussed in the review process so far. And so the point of view of author experience, that can lead to complications. So we prefer to avoid that scenario arising if possible. That said, there will be situations where you, as the handling editor, will feel that you do need to have additional external input. It could be that the paper is not quite at kind of at the center of your own personal expertise, and so you are relying more on the input of the reviewers. And if you don't feel confident in making a final decision based on the revisions that the authors have made and the input that you have been able to get from reviewers, then of course in that situation you may need to invite an additional external reviewer. And you can explain that to the authors in the subsequent decision letter that you send to them, particularly if you are asking for additional revisions. You can be transparent about the fact that you have had to seek new external input, and just ensure that the authors understand that. And of course, if it comes to the point of us having to reinforce that message to the authors from the journal office, then we can always step in and do that too. Okay. I can see there was a kind of second part to that question, which was around what to do in a scenario where you've received a paper as the academic editor that you feel doesn't comply with some of the journal's kind of basic formatting requirements, that sort of thing. Hopefully, you should find that you don't end up in this situation too often, because most of these will be things that are picked up during the in-house sub-scan process, where we're carrying out more of those kind of basic checks and asking the authors to make any changes that we think are necessary before peer review. If they are more kind of basic formatting things like, I don't know, the reference style, that sort of thing, we actually don't necessarily expect all of those policies to be complied with at initial submission. Typically, we will ask the authors to update their referencing system and that sort of thing during the revision process rather than at initial submission. So I would not suggest that you try to send back the paper to the authors at that initial stage before you conduct peer review. Instead, you can kind of allow the journal office to do that on your behalf during the revision process. Of course, if there's anything major that you think is missing in terms of methodological details, for example, again, hopefully that will have been picked up on during the in-house checks. But if that's not the case, then I think the best thing to do in that situation would be just to issue a major revision decision before peer review, clearly spelling out to the authors what's missing, what you expect them to add to the manuscript. And when that then comes back into you after they've conducted those revisions, you can then decide whether or not you want to send it out for peer review at that point. Okay, I can see there's just been another question. After receiving initial comments from the reviewer, does the editor make a decision based on the response letter provided by the authors, or is the response sent back to reviewers? So once the reviewer comments come in, the editor receives those confidentially and will be able to issue their decision based on their own evaluation and the reviewer's comments. That will then be sent out to the authors, and they will have the reviewer comments appended to the decision letter. When the revision comes back in from the authors, they will be asked to include, of course, a response to reviewers that goes through point by point how they've amended the manuscript in response to all of the issues or concerns that the reviewers have made, and again, anything that the editor has called out as in particular requiring a response. I hope that answers that question. If you need to ask a follow-up question, please let me know.
I think the way I understood it was, does it need to go back to re-review with the reviewers, which is at the editor's discretion, isn't it?
Right, I see. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Yes, that's right. That's basically down to the editor whether they want to send it back out to the reviewer or reviewers or not after the revision comes back. So, for instance, if there's been a major revision decision in the first round and the authors have had to make lots of changes to the manuscript, then I think more often than not, the handling editor will probably want to get the reviewer's eyes back on that paper before they issue a final decision. So in that scenario, generally it will go back out to the same reviewers. If the decision has been a really kind of simple minor revision, then usually the editor will feel more confident in being able to issue a final decision on the revised manuscript without having to send it back out to editors. But it's always down to the discretion of the academic editor as to whether they would like the reviewers to comment or not. And yes, absolutely. If the revisions are not satisfactory, if you feel that the authors have not been able to adequately respond to the reviewers' comments or to bring the manuscript in line with the publication criteria, then you are again fully empowered to issue a rejection if you think that's the appropriate outcome.
That's all of our typed questions. If anyone does have one that they'd prefer to explain, feel free to share, unmute yourself and tell us that question. If not, we're at time. If anyone needs to leave, please do so. And then we can set up some breakout sessions. So if you'd like to have a chat to some of your fellow editorial board members, this would be a good time as well. So just to close up from us at PLOS, reach out to us anytime if you need anything. There's lots of different groups at PLOS and we're quite responsive. We've got teams designated and really geared up to help you with whatever you need. Engage with us on social media. So you're a PLOS ambassadors now, and we would like you carrying the torch about open access message and about the quality that we have at PLOS and our high standards. So you can find us on Blue Sky for most of the journals. Water's not yet on there. And then our main PLOS account is on X, I guess. So yeah, just engage with us. Let us know if you need anything. Just be in touch. Okay, if anyone is ready for social time and you don't have any burning questions left to ask, I'll throw us into okay. Value on value. I don't understand the concept of that. Jamie, do you know what that be referring to, or could you explain it to us a bit further?
Value. I'm a section on value. Is this possibly in relation to the code of conduct or something like this? Are you able, Isaac, just to explain a bit more about where this is coming from, which part of the presentation this relates
Yeah.
to?
It is when you are looking for a reviewer. There's a section, a window that opens by the right. It says value. I don't know. Yeah, it says value. And what do we? I don't know what happens there. When you are looking for a reviewer, usually there's a window that opens. It talks of value also. Yeah, but I think yeah, it talks of value. Just so the yeah.
Is this
It talks of
possibly
yeah, yeah. When you have reviewer selection summary, you now go, you see search type, my publication, personal classification, classification matches, Web of Science reviewer locator. You go down, you see enter database, first name, selector, value. Can you see
right?
that window?
Yeah, I'm just trying to open up Editorial Manager as you speak, but I think this might be a more kind of technical question that we can follow up with you about. I think your question is to do with some of the search fields that are available for finding reviewers in Editorial Manager. So what I'd suggest is, rather than getting into a really kind of technical EM discussion now, we follow up with you just to kind of provide some clarity about that.
Okay. Okay, it's on the heading criterion.
Okay,
That's
thank you. Yeah, I will make a note to make sure that we get in touch with you about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got your name, and we'll write your query down and we'll get someone to contact you to let you know what that means. If we haven't heard of it before, it's likely not too important. So don't worry too much, but I'm sure it's just part of the technical things that that EM has got written in there.
Yeah, just a bit of jargon probably.
We do have one more question. How many opportunities should an academic reviewer give an author to revise the manuscript before recommending rejection?
So again, this is kind of a judgment call, really. I think, let's say you've issued a major revision after the first round of review, and the authors have made an effort to respond to that review, but they haven't quite got it across the line. I think generally speaking, you will probably want to give them a chance with some additional feedback to help guide them towards the possibility of reaching the publication criteria. So, but you obviously can't be expected to keep going through lots of cycles of that if it's clear that the authors are not going to get there in the end. So there does need to come a point where you kind of cut your losses on behalf of the authors as well, because they don't want to get kind of stuck in an endless loop of being asked to do revisions that they're not going to be able to do. So we would ask that you exercise your judgment, and if you feel that based on the responses that you've had from the authors after the first or second round of review are not making you confident that they're going to be able to satisfy the publication criteria, then it can be ultimately in everyone's interests to issue a rejection at that stage. And what I would say is that a rejection does not necessarily preclude the possibility of the authors making a resubmission of the same work in future. They can go away and they can work on the manuscript for a longer period of time than might be realistic for a further major revision, and they can resubmit that work. And we have specific workflows on the journals for handling resubmissions so that those authors are treated fairly and in the knowledge that they have made a previous submission of that work, so we can take into account the history of the paper at the journal.
And I think that answers the question that just came in as well about resubmitted after rejection. And yeah, you can definitely proceed with them if you feel like the changes that were requested have really been made. Carry on, go ahead. There's nothing that precludes them from resubmitting if we've issued a rejection.
Yeah, on that very final question there about rejections due to ethical issues, this is something that we should definitely be picking up on during those in-house checks. So if something for whatever publication ethics reason has been rejected, if those authors try to resubmit the same work to the journal, that should definitely be something that we, the staff editors, pick up on at initial submission, and it should not be ending up on your desk as the academic editors, and we will deal with it appropriately on our side. So hopefully that won't ever be something that you have to worry about. Obviously, if that situation does arise, we'll be able to discuss it with you as and when, but yeah, it should be extremely rare.
Okay, so I'm going to put you in some breakout rooms, and we've got some prompts for you to chat about. You're free to leave whenever you like. We'll leave the meeting open until everyone's logged off, so you'll have a chance just to connect. Put you in a few breakout rooms. There we go. It just takes a minute to throw you all in, so bear with us.